They built an electric fence on my farm, so I took down their entire HOA. The HOA trespassed on my land, stole acres of farmland, and thought I wouldn't fight back. So I exposed their corruption, dragged them to court, forced them to pay for damages, and got their president kicked out. Now, the fence is gone, the HOA is in ruins, and my farm is mine again, just like it always should have been. The sun had barely crested the horizon when Brian Dawson stepped onto his front porch, a steaming mug of coffee in hand. The morning air was crisp, carrying the familiar sense of damp soil and freshly cut alfalfa. Rusty, his loyal golden retriever, trotted beside him, stretching before flopping down on the wooden steps. It was supposed to be a day like any other, checking the livestock, inspecting the fields, making sure the old tractor would start without too much of a fight. But something was off. A low, steady hum pulsed through the air, a sound he'd never heard before. Brian frowned, tilting his head. It wasn't the wind through the trees or the usual morning buzz of insects. This was different. Mechanical, electrical. Setting his coffee down, he stepped off the porch and started toward the barn, Rusty padding along beside him. As he rounded the corner, his steps slowed, then stopped entirely. Across the middle of his land, an electric fence stretched in a straight, unwavering line, its metal posts glinting in the golden light. The wires thrummed with energy, crackling faintly every few seconds. The fence cut straight through his field, slicing off acres of fertile land he'd been tending his whole life. His heart pounded as he stepped closer, eyes narrowing. Bright red signs were attached to the posts at regular intervals, the words clear and unmistakable. Private property, no trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted. And below that, the logo of the Wellington Hills Homeowners Association. Brian's stomach twisted. The HOA? What the hell did they have to do with his farm? Rusty barked at the fence, sensing Brian's tension. He placed a cautious hand near the wire but didn't touch it, feeling the faint hum of electricity in the air. This wasn't a mistake. Someone had put this here deliberately. Someone who thought they had the right to claim what wasn't theirs. A rustling sound pulled his attention away. From the direction of the nearby subdivision, a figure approached, walking briskly down the dirt path that separated his farm from the row of newly built houses. Nicole Grayson. Brian recognized her immediately, even though they'd never formally met. She was the president of the Wellington Hills HOA, a woman known for her unyielding rules and iron-fisted control over the neighborhood. Unlike Brian, who stood in worn jeans and a flannel shirt, Nicole was impeccably dressed in a fitted blazer and pressed slacks, as if she were about to walk into a boardroom instead of a field. "Good morning, Mr. Dawson," she called out cheerfully as she approached, her high heels crunching against the gravel. "I see you've noticed the improvements we've made." Brian's eyes darkened. Improvements? His voice was tight when he spoke. "What the hell is this?" He gestured at the fence. "And why is it running through the middle of my farm?" Nicole gave a polished, professional smile, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. "This fence was necessary for the safety of our community," she said smoothly. "We've had concerns about trespassing, liability, and—" "This is my land," Brian interrupted, his voice sharp now. "And you had no right to put this here." Nicole sighed, as if she were explaining something obvious to a child. "I'm afraid you're mistaken," she said, reaching into her sleek leather handbag and pulling out a manila folder. "According to our records, this section of land was annexed into the HOA's jurisdiction years ago. It now falls under our property management." Brian snatched the folder from her hands and flipped through the documents inside. A map, a few printed records. The ink was fresh, the paperwork hastily compiled. He'd seen his family's deeds and surveys enough times to know this was wrong. His jaw clenched. "This is bullshit." He shoved the folder back at her. "My family has owned this land for 3 generations. We have the legal documents to prove it." Nicole's expression remained unreadable. "You're welcome to contest it, of course," she said lightly, tucking the folder back into her bag. "But in the meantime, the fence stays. It's for the safety of the community, after all." With that, she turned on her heel and walked away, her posture rigid, as if the conversation was already over. Brian stood frozen, his fists clenched at his sides, watching as she disappeared back into the subdivision. The hum of the fence was deafening now. This wasn't over. Not even close. Brian stormed back into the house, slamming the screen door behind him hard enough to rattle the windows. Rusty, sensing his mood, slunk to his usual spot near the fireplace, watching his owner with quiet concern. Brian wasn't a man who got angry easily. Farming had taught him patience. Seasons took their time, crops grew at their own pace, and nothing good ever came from rushing a storm. But this wasn't a storm he could wait out. Nicole had lied to his face. The Wellington Hills HOA had no claim over his land. But if they thought he was just some country idiot who'd take their word for it, they were in for a hell of a surprise. Brian marched straight to his office, a small but sturdy room filled with filing cabinets that had been in his family for decades. His grandfather had been meticulous about record keeping, and his father had done the same. He pulled open the bottom drawer, flipping through old property deeds, tax records, and survey reports that marked the land's boundaries as clearly as the sunrise. There it was, the original deed, signed nearly 80 years ago. It listed the Dawson family as the sole owners of the entire property, including the section where that damn fence now stood. Next, he grabbed the latest survey from 6 years ago, which confirmed the same thing. The HOA's so-called annexation? Complete nonsense. Brian exhaled sharply, staring at the documents spread out before him. He had the proof. But proving something to himself wasn't enough. He needed legal muscle. He pulled out his phone and dialed Megan Turner, a lawyer he'd worked with once before. She wasn't just any attorney. She was the kind that didn't take crap from anyone and knew property law better than most judges. When she answered, her voice was sharp and professional. "Brian, good to hear from you. What's going on?" Brian wasted no time. "I need your help. The HOA put up a fence on my land and claims it's theirs. I've got the deeds, surveys, and tax records proving otherwise." There was a pause. Then Megan let out a low whistle. "An HOA? Trespassing onto private farmland? That's a new one." Brian could hear the amusement in her tone, but there was something else too, a spark of interest. "I need to stop this before they pull any more stunts," Brian said. "Send me copies of everything you have," Megan replied. "All business now. I'll review it and we'll figure out our next move. But I can tell you right now, they don't have a leg to stand on." That was exactly what Brian needed to hear. After hanging up, he made one more call to a surveyor named Jack Brenner, a guy who knew every square inch of this county's land like the back of his hand. "If you need official proof of your boundaries, I can get you that," Jack assured him. "But I'll warn you now, if the HOA is pulling a stunt like this, they're not going to back down easy." Brian already knew that. The next morning, Brian woke up to more signs along the fence line. Bigger, bolder, no trespassing, private property of Wellington Hills HOA. They weren't just staking their claim, they were pushing him, testing how far they could go before he caved. Well, they'd picked the wrong man for that. He took photos of every single sign, making sure to capture the fence, the property beyond it, and the exact coordinates where they stood. Nicole might think she was in control, but she had no idea who she was messing with. Because Brian Dawson wasn't backing down. This wasn't just land. This was his family's legacy. And he was going to fight for it, no matter what it took. The letter arrived in a crisp white envelope, the Wellington Hills HOA logo stamped neatly in the corner. Brian ripped it open without ceremony, his eyes narrowing as he skimmed the contents. Formal notice of violation. Immediate compliance required. Asterisk, asterisk, the words were bold, aggressive, and infuriating. The letter ordered him to vacate the disputed section of land within 30 days, warning that failure to comply would result in legal action, fines, and potential property seizure. The audacity of it made his blood boil. They weren't just trying to intimidate him, they were trying to take what had never been theirs to begin with. He crushed the letter in his fist, jaw clenched so tight it ached. He wasn't the only one dealing with this kind of harassment. Over the next few days, Brian talked to neighbors who had their own stories to tell. Some had been fined for absurd violations, like using the wrong shade of paint on their shutters. Others had been threatened with lawsuits over minor infractions, from leaving trash bins out too long to parking in their own driveways. It was all part of the HOA's playbook, asterisk, asterisk, pressure, intimidation, control, asterisk, asterisk, but this was bigger than an arbitrary rule about lawn height. This was land theft, plain and simple. Brian documented everything. He took videos of the fence, zooming in on the buzzing wires, the flashing red signs, the posts dug deep into soil that belonged to him. He recorded himself reading the legal threats out loud, pointing out the contradictions and outright lies. He wrote down every conversation, every encounter with Nicole or any HOA official. If they wanted a fight, they were damn well going to get one. The surveyor, Jack Brenner, showed up a week later, armed with modern GPS equipment and decades of expertise. He moved methodically, marking boundaries, cross-checking records, confirming what Brian already knew. When he finished, he looked up from his notes and let out a low chuckle. "Well," he said, shaking his head, "this is about as clear-cut as it gets." HOA's claim? Total garbage. This land is yours, no question about it. Brian exhaled, a rush of vindication mixed with simmering rage. The truth was on his side, but truth alone wouldn't tear that fence down. He needed to take the next step. He needed to win. Emma Price showed up in a battered sedan, a notepad in one hand and a camera slung over her shoulder. She was younger than Brian expected, sharp-eyed and quick-moving, the kind of person who didn't waste time on pleasantries when there was a story to chase. She listened as he laid it all out, the fence, the threats, the legal nonsense Nicole and the HOA were trying to pull. She asked pointed questions, snapped photos of the electric fence slicing through his land, the ridiculous private property signs, and the official documents that proved, without a doubt, that the land had always belonged to the Dawson family. "This isn't just a property dispute," she said finally, flipping her notebook shut. "This is a power grab, and I think people need to hear about it." 2 days later, the article dropped. Farmer fights back. How an HOA tried to steal generations of family land. The headline was bold, the writing sharp, and the facts damning. The story laid out exactly what Nicole had done, how she'd erected a fence without notice, without legal backing, without a shred of proof. It called out the threatening legal notices, the HOA's history of bullying homeowners, and even included quotes from neighbors who had dealt with their own battles against Nicole's heavy-handed rule. The piece ended with a simple, gut-punching line. If they can do this to a farmer whose family has owned this land for generations, who's next? It spread fast. People shared it on Facebook, local news picked it up, and suddenly, Nicole wasn't the one calling the shots anymore. HOA members, ones who had blindly followed her leadership for years, started asking questions. Where were their dues going? Why was their association spending money on a legal fight against a private landowner? The pressure was building, and Brian could feel it. Nicole fought back the only way she knew how, by doubling down. The HOA released a statement full of vague, lawyer-approved nonsense, calling the article misleading and accusing Brian of stirring up unnecessary conflict. But no one was buying it. The damage was done. Meanwhile, Megan worked tirelessly behind the scenes, filing motions, gathering legal precedents, and preparing for court. Brian sat across from her at her office one afternoon, flipping through the growing pile of evidence they had stacked against the HOA. "They don't have a case," she said simply, tapping the folder. "They never did. But that doesn't mean they won't fight like hell to make this as difficult as possible." Brian nodded. He knew that much already. Nicole wasn't the type to go down easy. But now, for the first time since this whole mess started, he had the upper hand. The courtroom was packed. HOA members, reporters, curious locals, everyone wanted to see how this battle would play out. Brian sat beside Megan at the plaintiff's table, arms crossed, his jaw tight as he watched Nicole Grayson settle into her seat across from them. She looked composed, professional as ever, but Brian didn't miss the tightness around her mouth, the way her fingers tapped restlessly against the table. She was feeling the pressure. Good. The judge, Honorable Mary Harper, was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, known for cutting through legal theatrics like a hot knife through butter. She wasted no time getting started. Nicole's attorney, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit, was the first to present his case, arguing that the HOA had annexed the land years ago, making their claim legitimate. He gestured toward a set of documents filled with outdated maps and shaky legal phrasing, trying to paint Brian as an obstinate landowner unwilling to accept reality. Then it was Megan's turn, and Brian had never been more grateful to have her in his corner. She tore through their claims piece by piece, laying out real, legally binding deeds and surveys that proved beyond a doubt that the land had never been part of the HOA's jurisdiction. She highlighted contradictions in the HOA's argument, pointing out that their so-called annexation had never been formally filed with the county, meaning it had no legal standing. The judge listened carefully, occasionally raising an eyebrow at just how flimsy the HOA's case actually was. Then Megan delivered the knockout punch. She produced a leaked internal memo, obtained through discovery, and handed copies to the court. Brian watched as Nicole stiffened in her seat. She knew what was coming. "Your Honor, this document was circulated among the HOA board members 6 months ago," Megan said, her voice razor-sharp. "It's from Nicole Grayson herself. And in it, she explicitly acknowledges that the HOA has no legal claim to Mr. Dawson's land. A murmur rippled through the courtroom as the judge scanned the memo. Megan continued, flipping to the second page. Furthermore, the document states that the fence was constructed as a preemptive measure, and I quote, to establish dominance over the disputed land before legal challenges arise. She let that hang in the air. Nicole Grayson knowingly built that fence on land that didn't belong to her association, and she did it assuming Mr. Dawson wouldn't have the resources to fight back. Nicole's attorney scrambled to object, but Judge Harper had already seen enough. She leaned forward, her expression unreadable. "Miss Grayson," she said, "this is a very serious revelation. You knowingly authorized construction on private land without legal standing." Nicole opened her mouth, but for the first time since this started, she had no slick answer. The judge glanced between the two sides, then let out a breath. "I want to see this fence myself," she announced. "We'll conduct a site visit tomorrow morning. I expect both parties to be present." Brian exchanged a look with Megan. They had her, the fence, the land, the evidence, ***, all of it was in their favor. ***, Nicole had pushed too far, and now the whole town was watching her fall. The next morning, Brian stood at the edge of his field, arms crossed, waiting as a convoy of cars rolled down the dirt road toward his farm. The lead vehicle, a county-issued sedan, came to a stop, and Judge Mary Harper stepped out, followed closely by her clerk. Behind them, Nicole Grayson and her attorney arrived in a sleek SUV, her expression carefully neutral, though Brian could see the tension in her posture. Megan stood beside him, file in hand, her usual calm confidence unshaken. The judge wasted no time. "Show me," she said simply. Brian led the group toward the electric fence that had started this whole war. The hum of the wires was steady, a faint but ever-present reminder of just how far the HOA had overstepped. The judge walked the full length of it, pausing occasionally to study the bright red private property signs, the steel posts driven deep into the soil, and the cleared stretch of land that the HOA had effectively stolen. Nicole, ever the politician, kept her voice measured as she tried to spin the situation. "Your Honor, we acted in good faith to protect the community. There have been ongoing concerns about trespassing, liability." Judge Harper turned, fixing her with an unimpressed stare. "Ms. Grayson, let me be clear. This isn't your land." She gestured toward the survey markers, clearly showing the property boundaries. The legal documents presented in court confirmed that this land belongs to Mr. Dawson. You had no right to build anything here, let alone an electric fence designed to keep him off his own property. Nicole's mouth opened, then closed. For once, she had nothing to say. The judge turned back to Brian. "Mr. Dawson, I'll be issuing a formal ruling this afternoon, but let me be clear, this fence is an illegal encroachment. It will be removed." Brian exhaled, his shoulders loosening for the first time in weeks. That afternoon, back in the courtroom, the ruling was made official. "The court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Brian Dawson," Judge Harper declared, her voice firm and final. "The Wellington Hills Homeowners Association is ordered to remove the fence immediately at their own expense and restore the land to its original state. Furthermore, due to the deliberate and unlawful nature of the encroachment, the HOA is ordered to pay damages to Mr. Dawson for loss of use and legal fees." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Nicole sat rigid, her knuckles white where they gripped the table. The HOA had lost, completely and undeniably. Brian felt a weight lift off his chest. The land was his. The battle was over. And now, finally, the fence was coming down. The fallout was swift. The moment the judge's ruling hit the news, Nicole Grayson became the most hated woman in Wellington Hills. HOA members, many of whom had blindly trusted her leadership, now saw the truth laid bare, ***, she had lied, wasted their money, and dragged the entire community into a losing legal battle over land that had never been theirs. ***, the same people who once nodded along with her rules were now demanding answers. An emergency HOA meeting was called that weekend, and for the first time in years, Nicole wasn't in control. Residents bombarded her with questions. Why had she spent their dues on an illegal land grab? Why had she risked lawsuits that could bankrupt the association? The more she tried to explain, the worse it got. Someone shouted that she should step down. Another person demanded a full financial audit. The anger was louder than any excuse she could come up with. Finally, after 30 minutes of relentless pressure, Nicole straightened her blazer, lifted her chin like she still had some dignity left, and resigned on the spot. She didn't bother saying goodbye. She just walked out. By the following week, the HOA had a new president. Mark Evans. He was a quiet, level-headed man who had never quite agreed with Nicole's aggressive tactics but had stayed out of the spotlight. The first thing he did after being elected? Called Brian. "Mr. Dawson," he said when Brian picked up, "I just wanted to introduce myself and let you know that we're making things right." Brian wasn't sure what to expect, but Mark sounded genuine. No slick, rehearsed lines. No condescending tone. Just a man trying to clean up the mess left behind. "Good," Brian said, "because I expect that fence gone immediately." "You have my word," Mark assured him. "The removal crew will be there first thing in the morning." And just like that, it was over. The next day, Brian stood by the fence as workers tore down the metal posts, rolled up the crackling wires, and removed every last "no trespassing" sign. Rusty ran across the newly opened land, barking like he was celebrating too. By noon, there was nothing left but the open field, the way it had always been. Brian took a deep breath, feeling lighter than he had in weeks. The land was his again. The battle had been long, but he had won. A week after the fence came down, Brian got a call from Mark Evans. He half expected some last-minute issue, maybe more paperwork, maybe some leftover mess from Nicole's reign. But Mark's tone was calm, almost hesitant. "We're organizing a community picnic next month," he said. "We'd love for you to come." Brian raised an eyebrow. "A picnic? A way to move forward," Mark continued. "We're trying to rebuild trust with the community. People know what happened, and look, I get it. You don't owe us anything. But I think it would be good for everyone to see that we can all get past this." Brian wasn't sure what to say. He had spent weeks fighting these people. Some had blindly supported Nicole, others had ignored the situation entirely. But there were also good folks in the neighborhood, people who had reached out, who had supported him when it mattered. Maybe it was time to stop looking at all of them like enemies. "I'll think about it," Brian said. The day of the picnic arrived warm and sunny, the kind of weather that made his fields glow gold in the late afternoon light. Brian debated skipping it entirely. He didn't owe these people his time. But something in him, maybe a mix of curiosity and closure, told him to go. He showed up just as families were laying out blankets and setting up tables. The awkwardness was immediate. People stole glances at him, some with guilt, some with curiosity, others with genuine warmth. Mark approached, offering a firm handshake. "Glad you came." Brian didn't say much, just nodded. He wasn't here to make speeches. He was here to see for himself whether this so-called change was real. As the evening went on, conversations became easier. A few neighbors apologized for not speaking up sooner. Others admitted they had never liked Nicole's leadership but had been too afraid to challenge her. Mark reassured them that things would be different under his watch, fewer arbitrary rules, more transparency, no more power trips. Near the end of the night, Brian found himself holding an envelope with his name written in neat, precise handwriting. Someone had slipped it onto his table when he wasn't looking. He opened it. "Dear Mr. Dawson, I wanted to extend my apologies for what happened. In hindsight, I let my responsibilities cloud my judgment. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me. Sincerely, Nicole Grayson." Brian stared at the letter, unreadable emotions stirring in his chest. Forgiveness? That was a stretch. But for the first time since this whole thing started, Nicole had nothing left to take from him. And that, in itself, was enough. The land was his again. No more buzzing electric fence, no more threats, no more signs claiming what was never theirs to begin with. Just open field stretching as far as the eye could see, the way it had always been. Brian stood at the edge of his property one evening, hands in his pockets, watching the wind roll through the crops. For the first time in months, he felt at peace. He had spent so much time fighting, pushing back, making sure no one took what wasn't theirs to take. But now, with the battle won and the HOA under new leadership, life was settling back into its familiar rhythm. Early mornings, hard work. Evenings spent on the porch with Rusty at his feet. That was the life he loved, the one he had fought for. A few weeks after the dust had settled, Brian got an unexpected call from a local high school teacher. A civics class had been following his story, the legal fight, the injustice, the way one man had taken on an HOA and won. "The students want to meet you," the teacher said, "to talk about property rights, standing up for yourself, and fighting back against unfair systems." At first, Brian wasn't sure what to say. He wasn't a teacher. He wasn't some political activist. He was just a farmer who refused to be pushed around. But then he thought about it, asterisk, how close he had come to losing, how easily things could have gone the other way if he hadn't fought back. Asterisk, if his story could help someone else. Maybe it was worth telling. So one crisp autumn morning, A group of high school students arrived at his farm, notebooks in hand, eager to listen. Brian showed them the land, pointed out where the fence had once stood, and told them about the fight, about knowing your rights, about not backing down when you know you're right, about the cost of standing alone, but also the reward of seeing justice served. Asterisk, asterisk. As the students left, one girl lingered behind. She looked up at Brian, serious beyond her years. My parents had to fight our HOA too, she said quietly. They lost. Brian felt that weight. Not every battle ended in victory. Not everyone had the resources to push back the way he had. But he had won this one, and maybe that meant something. Maybe it meant the next person wouldn't have to fight as hard. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Brian sat on his porch, watching the sky fade into deep oranges and purples. Rusty lay beside him, tail thumping lazily against the wooden floorboards. The farm was quiet, peaceful, his, and no one would ever take that from him again.